All right, everyone, we are now live on Facebook and here on Zoom. Welcome to tonight's event. We are very excited to have Kim with us from Dry Creek Vineyards. Also on the line tonight, you have me. Hi, Carol Ann here. If you have any questions throughout the program, I'll be sharing them with Kim and the rest of the team on the line. We also have Erin, our representative from Pine State, and she has created an epic list of restaurants that have Dry Creek here in New Hampshire, so stay tuned for that. We also have Sarah from Dry Creek. She's going to be helping Kim, sharing her screen. Kim, of course, Kurt from the winery, and if you can see his background, he is not at the winery, but he has the most realistic virtual background I've ever seen. And of course, our wine marketing specialist, Lisa Goslin. So welcome, everyone. We're so excited for tonight. We love hosting these live tastings with you, and we hope that you're tasting along at home. And if you're not, we hope that tonight's event will get you excited to try some Dry Creek products for yourself. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Kim.
Well, hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really excited. And I have to say, Kurt, your background does look very real. That's our tasting room. And Kurt is actually in Vermont. I'm actually in the winery, in the cellar, in the corner of the cellar, in a little room that we created called the barrel room. And maybe you can see behind me, there's a mirror that's reflecting some of the barrels. And it's very authentic. And you'll learn as I speak about how authentic Dry Creek Vineyard is. So I like to sit right in the middle of the barrel room, which is where I grew up, to really give a sense of what we're all about. But anyway, so thank you, Carol Ann. I'm Kim Stare Wallace. I'm the second generation owner and president of Dry Creek Vineyard, which is our family winery. And I could not be more excited and really proud to be carrying on the family tradition. And we are actually in our 49th year of operation. And honestly, folks, I pinch myself thinking that next year is our 50th anniversary. But I want to give you a little background on the winery, some history, and I'll talk to you about sort of my role and what we're doing here. And then I'm actually going to be tasting the wines. Lucky me. Hopefully a lot of you have the wines at home, and if not, you can certainly get them. But anyway, our history kind of goes back to the roots of my parents. So my father, David Stare, founded the winery in 1972. And my parents, though, were originally from the Boston area. They grew up right outside of Boston. And in fact, I have a lot of relatives in New England. And I believe I even have an uncle, Uncle Roy, and his wife, Pat Hugenberger, who I think are listening in today. They live in New Hampshire, and I invited them. So hopefully if they're here, hi, Uncle Roy. Anyway, my parents grew up in Massachusetts. And my dad was a civil engineer. He was an MIT graduate. And when I was very young, we actually moved to Germany for a year. I was 4 years old at the time. And during that experience in Germany, I think that's when they first really got bitten by the wine bug. And so they visited, obviously, the Moselle and the Rhine River areas of Germany, but also they spent a lot of time in the Loire Valley and Burgundy and Bordeaux areas of France. And that's kind of what I think originally sparked the wine and the interest in wine. When they came back to Massachusetts in the late 1960s, my father very quickly saw an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was about the future of the California wine industry. And he kind of scratched his head, and I think he had realized that civil engineering was not going to be a lifelong passion. And he basically convinced my mom that they should sell everything they own and load the kids up in the car and drive across America to come to California. And so that's exactly what he did. And he actually went back to school at the University of California at Davis and studied viticulture and winemaking. And I remember as a young child, on the weekends, we drove all over Northern California looking for property for my parents to start their dream winery. And gosh, we traveled to Napa, Sonoma, even Mendocino counties, but somehow they settled on this very sleepy, neglected valley called the Dry Creek Valley. And on a handshake deal, and literally, I don't think people do it this way anymore, but on a handshake deal, Dad bought a 55-acre rundown prune orchard. Now this photograph is really special to me because the little girl in the lower right-hand corner, of course, is yours truly. And that is actually at our groundbreaking ceremony in 1972. And so I was the first to turn over the shovel full of dirt at the before we started to build the winery. And you might see that behind me is an old prune orchard. Those were the trees that he had started to clear in preparation for planting the first grapevines. So not only did my father come to Dry Creek Valley and become the first to open up a winery after Prohibition, but he was the first to plant grapevines, and he was the first to plant Sauvignon Blanc in Sonoma County. So truly a pioneer. And I'm really blessed. My father retired about, oh gosh, now let's see, in 2006, but he's still doing great and good health. And I see him all the time. So we arrived, and I think one of the things that happened is we really kind of shook up the region, if you will. So when we moved here, as I said, there were all these prune farmers, and there were some other crops. There were certainly some hops and some other fruit orchards like pears and apricots, but mostly prunes. But Dad's vision for producing world-class grapes was really the beginning of the renaissance of wine growing in northern Sonoma County. And so he inspired so many others to come to this region. And I credit him, and I certainly credit our winery with a lot of historic firsts. So things that maybe we take for granted today in our industry. For example, we were the first winery to ever coin the term old vine for our Zinfandel. And that was back in the mid-1980s. Unfortunately, I had just come back to work for the winery, and I was too naive to know that you should trademark something. So I never trademarked the term old vine. Big mistake on my part. But we were also the first winery to advocate for Bordeaux style blending for our red wines. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I taste the wines. And gosh, the first to develop the whole concept of sustainability. So lots of history really is seeped in our family. And I think it's really something I like to share, just because I don't want people to forget. So as you can imagine, I've held just about every job at the winery. I grew up here just down the road, about a mile away. This is sort of a fun slide because it shows that I was literally working in our tasting room. I was probably about 13 years old there on the photograph on the left. And while I wasn't pouring wine, but I certainly could take orders, and that appears to be what I'm doing with the little notepad on my lap. But I love this picture because if any of you are familiar with Dry Creek, you know we love to sail. And right above my head is a calendar with a sailboat on it. So even back then, our family was passionate about sailing. And of course, the rotary phone on the wall definitely is a bit of nostalgia. Anyway, I grew up here. I've worked in lots of different jobs. I worked in the office, obviously. I worked in the cellar. I did a lot of hose dragging as a teenager. And then I swore I would never work here as a grown-up, right? So if any of you work for family-owned businesses, you probably can relate. They can be challenging. And as a child, I thought I had much better things to do than work for Dry Creek Vineyard. But thankfully, I changed my mind after working in another industry for a number of years out of college. And I came back to work for my dad in 1986. And I've been here ever since. And I took over as president. Gosh, this picture just makes me chuckle. I don't know if you can see, but boy, did I have some big shoulder pads. Those were the days, right? Anyway, I came back in 1986 and have been here ever since, and took over as president about 10 years ago. My background throughout the years has really been focused on the marketing and the branding side. And one of the things that I really loved, one of the great, opportunities that I had, and obviously based on the smile on my face in these pictures, I enjoyed myself, is I got our wines involved in the Screen Actors Guild Awards. And for 12 years, we were the official wines of the SAG Awards. We produced a SAG Awards cuvee for them and hosted a lot of celebrities here at the winery. And really it was a fun time and a great way to expose our family's wines to that industry. I saw a question pop up in front of me about which college I attended. So I ended up going to San Francisco State University. And that was because I had met my husband. I actually went to boarding school in Massachusetts when I was 14 years old. And I had met my husband at a young age and ended up falling in love and came back and decided to change college paths. And instead of going to school in New England, I stayed in California for college. Anyway, okay, so So I worked here as a child, began to work for my father. And, you know, in 1990, my husband joined the winery. And one of the things that started to happen is we started to see a very big transformation going on in our industry. And this is my husband, Don. I always refer to him very lovingly as the dirt guy. And that's because he has been largely instrumental for the major, really the wonderful vineyards that we've developed over the years. But anyway, I digress. So we started, after years and years of working here, started to get a little worried about the future of the California wine industry. And what I mean by that is, around the year 2000, we were starting to see more and more very large corporations begin to purchase some of the family-owned businesses. And of course, it's continuing today. And, if you think about it, these big boys are kind of gobbling up the medium-sized guys, and then the medium-sized guys are gobbling up the little guys. And Dawn and I, and my whole family started to look at, where did we want to take this winery, right? What was our vision? We had so many great wines we were producing. We had, we were very successful. We were distributing our wines around the country and actually internationally. But I sort of felt like we had gotten away from some of the sort of the foundation, if you will, of what really put Dry Creek Vineyard on the map. And so we began kind of a complete reinvention of our family winery, all designed with one thing in mind. And that one thing is this: we wanted to go from being a good winery, making good wines, to a truly great winery making great wines. And we were willing to do just about anything to make that happen. And so over time, we have literally reinvented ourselves. And it started with the vineyards. We felt strongly that we needed to be focused on the Dry Creek Valley more than we were. Now, mind you, we are the region's namesake winery, right? We have many phenomenal vineyards here in Dry Creek Valley that we own. We also work with a lot of growers for a very long-term period of time. But we also were growing grapes in other areas of Sonoma County, like Alexander Valley, for example. And I just felt like we should get back to the basics and get back to Dry Creek Valley. And so this was one of the first things we started to shift. And I think this would be a good time to share why Dry Creek Valley is so special. And that is, well, first of all, I don't know how many of you today have been to Dry Creek Valley, but we are one of the 18 appellations in Sonoma County. We're at the northern end of the county, and we're about 75 miles due north of San Francisco. And if you look at, I love that. If you look at a photograph of California and of Sonoma County, this is all the different appellations. And you can see we're at the northern end, just north of the town of Healdsburg. And anyway, one of the things that makes our particular little valley special, well, there's really three things. It's a small region. We're only 16 miles long by about a half a mile to maybe a mile wide. So very small little region, but we're very diverse topographically. So we have these very steep kind of elevated hillsides and benchlands on the eastern and western sides of the valley that is primarily where we grow our red wines. And this is a great shot because it shows you kind of the scope of, this is northwestern Dry Creek Valley. So it shows you how rugged that terrain is. We also have, and we grow grapes there, obviously. We also have grapes grown on the valley floor. And that's where I'm sort of sitting here. I'm actually up on a little bench where the winery is, but we're basically along the valley floor. And there is a creek called Dry Creek, which is no longer dry. It's actually a year-round flowing river, thanks to a dam that was built here in the late 1970s. But the creek flows north-south, and this is where we grow most of our Sauvignon Blanc. So the second thing about Dry Creek Valley that I think makes it very unique is the soil. So we have three distinctive soil types. We have, as I mentioned earlier, the western slope, which is primarily a soil that is very high in iron. So bright red rocky soils. And this is a really good photograph that shows that. And then we have on the right side, I mentioned the valley floor. That's that kind of sandy, loamy clay, very well-drained soil. Really, really good for Sauvignon Blanc, and happens to be where my dad lucked out and actually planted Sauvignon Blanc almost 50 years ago. And then on the eastern side of the valley is more of a kind of fluffy, flaky, loose soil that's a decomposing sedimentary rock. And we grow some Bordeaux varietals there, but we also grow Zinfandel. And then I guess the third and probably one of the most important things about Dry Creek Valley and why we're such a distinctive region as opposed to say Napa Valley or other areas of California is the proximity to the ocean. So this slide shows you just how close we are to the Pacific Ocean, really only about 20 miles as the crow flies. And you can see that, you know, Napa is quite a bit east of us. And because of our location and our proximity to the Pacific Ocean, we have a tremendous influence by that fog layer or that marine layer. And so in the summer months, and actually coming up here, I would say starting in about May, we'll have the fog that will roll in every night, and it'll get quite cool in the evenings, you know, mid 50s, low 50s. And that fog rests on the vines and really doesn't burn off until about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning in the summertime. And then the temperatures will go up to, you know, obviously the 80s and 90s, and we can even get temperatures above 100 degrees. But because the fog rolls in every single night, it cools the grapes down, and it really provides a nice, long, slow maturation period, or what we say hang time, for those grapes. And so it's just an ideal area to grow world-class wine grapes. I would say maybe one of the two varietals that we can't really grow as effectively here would be Pinot Noir. It's a little too warm for that, and Chardonnay, again, but we do grow Chardonnay. We have our own estate vineyards in the Russian River Valley, which is a much cooler climate. Let's see, how am I doing time-wise? So I'm getting a little thirsty. So I'm gonna start drinking my first wine, and I hope for everybody who has the first wine that they will join me. And this is actually one of my favorites. This is our dry Shenan Blanc, our 2019 dry Shenan Blanc. And I think we are the only winery in the United States of America who has produced 49 consecutive vintages of a dry style Shenan. And if you remember what I said earlier, my dad was very much inspired by the Loire Valley in France, where they grow Chenin Blanc, and of course they grow Sauvignon Blanc. That's where the inspiration for this wine originated. And for all these years, we've really specialized in this nice dry style because Chenin Blanc can be made in many styles. It can be made very sweet, it can be made bone dry. Our style is considered a dry style, meaning the residual sugar is below the threshold of perception. When you're about 1% is when it starts to taste sweet. And this is 0.4%. So I'm just gonna give it a little swirl here. If you're at home and you've got a glass of wine, really take time to swirl it. I am a big swirler. I love aerating my wines. It allows all those beautiful aromas to open up and jump out of the glass. So anyway, Chenin Blanc is one of those varietals that is super unique. And I'm excited because next year we're making a very small amount of a sparkling Chenin Blanc in celebration of our 50th anniversary. So maybe there'll be some available. Anyway, Chenin Blanc as a grape variety is a very tropical, kind of fruit forward, very aromatic white wine. It tends to have fruits like pineapple, guava, maybe a little honeydew melon. Sometimes our winemaker, Tim Bell, describes it as having almost a watermelon rind aroma. And it's very refreshing. There could not be a more perfect wine for summer season, which is coming up. It's super refreshing. It's great for the humidity that you guys have in your summertime months. And with Easter being right around the corner, it's a super wine for Easter. I love this wine for Easter. I'm just gonna take a little sip. One thing that I think is kind of a fun bit of trivia, and we actually just recently learned this, you guys. We did not know this, but we got a call from the White House Historical Society, I guess a couple of months ago now, maybe. And they actually informed us that our Chenin Blanc had been served under 2 administrations at the White House for various dignitaries, and this was under the Ford and the Carter administration. And so they sent us the original menus, which I don't know if you can see it, but it's really fun to see what the menus were, some of the really kind of traditional foods that we haven't probably had lately, but filet of sole Veronique, for example, or peach melba for dessert with the sparkling that they serve. But I love this because it really, I love it. Anyway, one other thing about Shenan that I think is important to know is it's really versatile with food, can go with all different types of cuisines, but there is no better wine for oysters. So if you are anywhere near, a great seafood store, or of course, being in New Hampshire, I know you guys have amazing oysters all up and down the New England coast. You have great oysters. So do yourself a favor and get some oysters. We actually do something here at the winery. We make oyster shooters, where we take a shot glass, we put an oyster in it, we pour a little Shenan Blanc over the top and slurp it down. There's nothing better. So that's my easy appetizer tip of the day for Shenan Blanc. Okay, so let's go on. I'm going to start talking about the second wine. Now, I mentioned earlier Fumé Blanc, and this is the wine that my dad pioneered. We were the first winery in Sonoma County to produce a Fumé Blanc back in 1972. And today it truly is the flagship of our winery. And of course, it is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. And a lot of people get confused by the terminology Fumé Blanc. Well, it is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. Fumé Blanc is just a marketing term. And you might wonder, why do we call it that? Well, when my father started the winery, the only other really successful Sauvignon Blanc in the market was Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc. And Mr. Mondavi had actually coined the term Fumé Blanc, which means white smoke in French, in 1968. And so when my father came along in 1972, and he loved the white wines of the Puy-Fumé area of the Loire Valley, and Mondavi had coined this term Fumé Blanc, Dad thought, I'm going to call it Fumé Blanc. So we call it Fumé Blanc. There's really no other reason. People can get confused because they assume that it's oak aged. And in our case, it is not. In fact, it's never oak aged. And I actually think this is a wine that is probably one of our most historic wines, because it really was a wine style that helped the California wine industry really in its development of Sauvignon Blanc. And now there are many great Sauvignon Blancs, but ours has always been known as kind of the quintessential Sauvignon Blanc produced in the classic Loire Valley style. So what does that mean? We have beautiful citrus, Meyer lemon, a little bit of a maybe ruby red grapefruit characteristic in the aromatics. It's bone dry. That means no residual sugar, so very refreshing, very crisp, bright acids. This is the 2019 vintage, and that vintage was a little cooler, and so we got some really nice bright acids as a result of the cooler vintage. We have a little bit of lime leaf. And maybe if you're smelling it with me and tasting it with me, you might even notice a little bit of maybe dried herbs de Provence, right? Like some of the herbs that you would find in a bouquet garni, like tarragon or thyme, or maybe a little bit of rosemary. Great also with oysters, just like the Shenan Blanc. But also I would serve this with anything with goat cheese. I love it with obviously any poultry or seafood dishes. I love it with scallops. I know New Englanders eat a lot of haddock, so it's a nice one to serve with haddock. And I bet you Aaron's got some restaurants that might be even serving it right now. Sarah, if you might just show the label. So this is sort of a fun transition a fun slide showing the transition of our labels. And it gives me an opportunity too to share with you the story of why on earth we have sailboats on a brand called Dry Creek, right? It's kind of a bit of an ironic choice of imagery for wine labels. But as you can see, in the early days, we had the old, I used to refer to that label as the Fort Apache label. And if you look closely, the illustration of behind the words Fumé Blanc on the 1972 label actually is an illustration of the winery. But my family, my father in particular, and my husband, all love to sail. And when I was a kid, we sailed on the San Francisco Bay. That's just what we did. My dad grew up sailing off the coast of Massachusetts. And so sailing was always in our DNA. And one time, and this was I don't even know if I was of legal drinking age, but I remember going out sailing with Dad, and I said, Dad, I think you ought to do something about your labels. They're very tired, and they're sort of old-fashioned and stodgy looking, and you love to sail, so why don't you consider a sailboat on your brand, a brand called Dry Creek? Like, isn't that kind of funny? And my dad said, that's a great idea, honey. And at that point, he allowed me to go out and find an artist. We work with a local artist here in Sonoma County, and we commissioned our very first sailboat artwork, which happened to be a watercolor. And those were the labels that we did in the, actually, we don't even show the very original label, but in the mid 80s, we used watercolors, and then we transitioned to oil paintings and whatnot. But throughout these years, we've always tried to capture kind of the spirit of the wine, if you will, in the painting. And maybe Sarah, if you have the close-up of the Fumé Blanc label now, I'd like to just talk about this. So first of all, this is, the label, the coloring of the sailboat painting is meant to really evoke the sort of citrusy, refreshing, sunshiny, if you will, aromatics and flavors of our Fumé Blanc. But we also recently redesigned our label to try to showcase just how authentic our brand is, and the fact that we are a family-owned winery. We are the real deal. We control every aspect of our business. And that might seem like, yeah, of course you do. But the reality, everybody, is that that's not really happening in the California wine industry as much as you might think. And I'm starting to see more and more labels and brands that are no longer owned by the original founders. They're no longer owned by the family. And in our case, that's the opposite. And so we're trying very, very much to sort of showcase the fact that we have nothing to hide. So on the label, we're talking about where the grapes are grown, and that we're practicing 100% sustainability, and that we use minimal intervention. I mean, this is a wine that is stainless steel fermented. It sees no oak aging, really pure, classic, clean expression of Sauvignon Blanc. And we even decided that we wanted to put some of the wellness details right on the front label. So the fact that the wine is gluten-free and vegan, which is important to folks who are watching out for that. But anyway, I think Fumé Blanc, if you're going to drink one wine from Dry Creek Vineyard, I would suggest that it be this one. And again, with spring coming up and the summer months, it's a perfect choice. All righty. So Chardonnay. I think I'm doing pretty well for time. Yeah, doing well for time. How am I doing, Caroline?
We're doing good. And Kim, before you go on to the Chardonnay, we have a couple of questions.
Great.
Would the Fumé Blanc go good with ham dinner for Easter?
Okay, I'm going to be totally truthful. Fumé Blanc goes with everything. Having said that, I would actually recommend our Zinfandel, the Heritage Vine Zinfandel, which I'm going to taste and talk about in 2 more wines. Zinfandel, I would think, would be the perfect choice for that. And frankly, the Shenan, the dry Shenan.
And then one more for you, Shirley, who is tuning in on Facebook tonight. She wants to know if the Fumé Blanc is more sweet or dry.
It is dry, bone dry, no residual sugar. Crisp, refreshing, vibrant, lively on the palate. One of the really sort of unknown mysteries about Sauvignon Blanc, and ours in particular, is you actually can age our Fumé Blanc. So if you remember, I was saying we're celebrating our 50th anniversary next year. And we've been having a wonderful time going through our old library of wines, tasting wines in anticipation of that next year. And oh my gosh, we have been so delighted with some of the older Fumé Blancs that, mind you, they've been kept in a nice, consistent temperature. That's really important if you're going to try to age wines. But oh boy, the Fumé Blanc will age beautifully. And when it does, it sort of loses some of its upfront citrusy elements and begins to actually take on some of the characteristics of a great Italian delicatessen. So if you think of like green olive and basil, oregano, some of those spice smells that you can get when you walk in a great Italian deli. And it gets a little bit more texture, a little richer and almost oily.
Delicious. Thank you. Okay, Chardonnay time. We're ready.
Okay, Chardonnay time. I'm hoping everybody has some Chardonnay in their glass. I'm really, really proud of this wine. And I think it's a good example of kind of truly the commitment to quality that drives our winery, and really my own passion for only making wines that I'm proud of and that reflect the region and the terroir of our region. So our Chardonnay comes from a vineyard that we call Block 10. It's 100% Russian River Valley. And many, many years ago, we actually made a fair amount of Chardonnay, a lot of Chardonnay, as a matter of fact. And it was a Sonoma County appellated Chardonnay, and it was quite pleasant. But I honestly wasn't thrilled with it. And you know what? Life is too short to not be thrilled with what you produce or what you do. And so when I took over, one of the first things that I said to Tim, our winemaker, is, okay, buddy, you got one shot at this. I want you to make the best Chardonnay you can, because if not, we're going to get out of the Chardonnay business. Now, by the time we had hired Tim in 2011, my husband and I had already developed our own signature estate vineyard in the Russian River Valley, which is south of here and much cooler and much better suited for Chardonnay. And it's very impacted by the fog. And this picture is actually a portion of that vineyard. So we had begun working with Russian River Valley fruit. But when Tim came along, as I said, I wanted to give him an opportunity to really, showcase, or I should say, make the wine showcase what he felt would be the very best of the vintage and the best of our abilities. And so I just told him to go to town. Well, that's pretty much a winemaker's dream these days, right? Very few winemakers get to do that, right? And I'll never forget the day when he called me into the lab and he said, Kim, I want you to taste the new Chardonnay. So I went into the lab and I tasted it and I smelled it and I swirled it. And I said, oh, Tim, it's just delicious. And it had beautiful, luscious flavors. And it had a little bit of a, tart, crisp green apple. And it had a little bit of a nice nutty nutmeg, but not too much. A little bit of maybe a baked Alaska characteristic and all the things I love in Chardonnay. But it had brightness and crispness and acidity. And I said, this is great. And he said, there's just one small problem. We can only make a very small amount. And I said, well, how much? And he said, about 1,000 cases. And we were making quite a bit more at the time. And I said, that's great. That's all we're going to make. And so the state of New Hampshire is lucky enough to have a small amount of this vintage, which I don't remember the exact production, but I think it's about 900 cases worth. So very limited production. So as I've mentioned, it's from Russian River Valley, from our own estate. He basically identified a section within the vineyard, about 30 vine rows that seemed to, in his opinion, and based on the last couple of vintages, I would totally agree, get just the right amount of ripeness, the right amount of acidity, and just for whatever reason, this particular section of the vineyard was really where we wanted to make wine from. We age it for about 6 to 8 months in 100% French oak barrels. About a third of them are new. And for me, balance is very, very important. So I don't like highly oaked wines, overhanded use of oak, I should say. We don't like to do a lot of manipulation. So we're very judicious in our oak treatment. This is a wine that is partially barrel fermented. And it also undergoes a partial malolactic fermentation, which is what is the secondary fermentation that creates that creamy richness, if you will. But I think overall the wine is just beautiful, wonderful, wonderful aromas, good crisp acidity. It's a wine that you can sip and enjoy and savor. You can also enjoy it with all kinds of cuisines. I don't know if I'm just sort of channeling New Hampshire or New England today, but I could just see this with lobster, right? I haven't had lobster since last summer or 2 summers ago when I was in Maine. But poultry dishes, maybe with a little bit of creamy sauce, a little richer sauce, maybe a little bit of tarragon. That's a wonderful spice with Chardonnay, in my opinion. I really enjoy this wine a lot. And I wanted to just kind of wrap that up by just saying that, when Dad retired and we shared with him our vision for the winery and this whole notion of producing varietal defining, appellation focused, and what we say, we call it terroir driven wines that really taste of a sense of place. And all these years later, to go from making quite a lot of Chardonnay that was, just fine, to this Chardonnay, I think shows you how committed we are to nothing but quality and never compromising here at Dry Creek Vineyard. Okay, moving on to the Zinfandel. Now, this is the wine I'd probably serve with Easter dinner, depending on what you're having. Certainly ham is a natural, but I can't imagine a more appropriate wine for Easter dinner. So one of the things I wanted to share about Dry Creek Valley that I probably forgot, but before my dad came here, one of the reasons why he was attracted to the Dry Creek Valley is it had this proven track record for grape growing long before Prohibition. And that was brought by the Italians who settled here in the late 1800s. And it was actually the Italians that first planted Zinfandel. So Prohibition, of course, changed all that. And of course, they were converted primarily to prune orchards. But fortunately, there were some remaining old Zinfandel vineyards. And so when we came to town, we started making Zinfandel. We are very much an expert and a specialist in Zinfandel. We produce a number of different bottlings. This one we call the Heritage Vines Zinfandel. And the reason why is because as more growers and more people were moving to this area, we began to see these wonderful historic vineyards be torn out, which is really a travesty. But they were being torn out because they were very low yielding, producing very little tonnage, and people were planting higher producing, more profitable varietals and in a more contemporary manner. So we lost a lot of those great old vine Zinfandel vineyards. So our family started a propagation technique where we actually went out and collected the canes off of an old Zinfandel vineyard. And this is a great picture that shows you what a head pruned Zinfandel vine looks like. So there's no trellising system. And you can see those canes, right? Those get pruned every January. But anyway, we went into a vineyard, in a very famous vineyard, the Mazzoni Ranch, and collected the canes and then grafted them onto rootstock that we planted in a new vineyard. And it coincided when my husband and I bought our property, which is right next door. We actually live right next door to the winery. And we bought a 12-acre vineyard in 1990 and grafted that over to this, using this technique. And so you can see this is an illustration that shows how you basically make a little incision in the grapevine and insert the bud, which has all the DNA about the vine. And then you wrap it up with tape, and like grafting fruit trees, magically it turns into a new vine. It's a really quite an amazing phenomena, and it takes a very specialized person to do this kind of work. So once we had grafted our grapevines in this manner, we went through and did this in a number of different vineyards. And our first vintage was actually 1994. And I called it Heritage Clone Zinfandel because we were trying to replicate those heirloom historic vines. And so I thought the word clone sort of was the right word. Well, I dropped the term clone a long time ago for probably obvious reasons. And we simply call it Heritage Vines Zinfandel. But it is not just a marketing term. It truly refers to the propagation technique. Now, one of the things about this wine that also is unique, in addition to that, is that it is a blend. It is a classic blend, very similar to some of the old field blends. And it's 77% Zinfandel, 22% Petite Syrah, and then a little bit of old vine Carignan. This Carignan is a variety that there's hardly any left in the region, but we actually found a very historic 100-year-old Carignan vineyard. And so we blend a little bit of that. It kind of rounds out the mouthfeel, gives a little bit richer mid palate. But when you swirl and taste this wine, what I'm hoping you experience is the same as what I'm experiencing and what I think is so fabulous about Zinfandel. So think of blackberry, think raspberry, maybe a little boysenberry, from a fruit profile perspective. In terms of spices, I always sort of think of the spices you would use in cooking, like Thanksgiving pumpkin pie. So a little bit of cinnamon, maybe a little nutmeg, coriander, maybe a little cardamom, and then of course a little bit of, sometimes Zinfandel is more black pepper. I think this shows a little more white pepper. And I'm gonna take a sip here. When you swallow the wine, it should really be beautifully balanced with good acidity. So this is one of the most frustrating things, I think, for people when they're drinking Zinfandel. A lot of times Zinfandel can be very overripe and high in alcohol. And that's a style. Some people like that. We at Dry Creek Vineyard don't. We like a very food-friendly, very balanced, elegant wines. And so you'll notice this has a lovely level of acidity that balances out this wine. It will help it age. It also makes the wine much more compatible for foods. And part of the reason why is because Dry Creek Valley is so great for growing Zinfandel, in that we have that fog that cools the grapes down. So certain areas, maybe the Lodi region, for example, which is much hotter, Zinfandel can get very, very overripe. I think the other thing about our Zinfandel that's really special is our barrel treatment. So we do age this in barrels for about 18 months, but the barrel is a really special barrel. We're the only winery with this barrel, and we call it a fusion barrel. And this is a development that Tim, or an invention really, that Tim came up with a number of years ago. And he worked with our cooper to design a barrel that would not overpower the delicate aromas of Zinfandel. Because again, if you're using the wrong oak, or if the oak is heavily toasted, you really can mask the beautiful varietal characteristics. So this fusion, the reason why we call it a fusion barrel is that the heads, which is the top and the bottom, and you're seeing the side of the barrel there, are French oak heads. And then the staves, which are the sides of the barrel, are a combination of American, Yugoslavian, and Hungarian oak. And so we kind of just came up with this term fusion barrel. So it's a fusion of different oak species from around the world. And what it allows us is to have a beautifully balanced Zinfandel that's not overpowering, that's just absolutely yummy. And I guess we must be doing something right, because we've received, this wine received a 91-point score. For 7 years in a row, we've received a 90 or a 91-point score from Wine Spectator. And actually, this was in the Wine Spectator's top 100 as one of the best wines in the world. So that's pretty cool, something I'm pretty proud of. I see a wonderful person. Oh, Tom Becker. I saw my friend Tom Becker. Hi, Tom. Tom mentioned something that I might not normally say, but you know what? I feel like I can share it with all of you. And that is that if you are readers of the Wine Spectator, they had they actually had a really cute blonde on the cover. I don't know if you have the photo, Sarah. So this was the March 31st issue. And I made the cover, and their story was about winery people and their dogs. And that is my beautiful blonde dog, Holly. And she's a golden or a yellow lab that is the sweetheart of my life. And I have to admit, I'm still pinching myself. So if you haven't picked up that issue, it's a fun one. It's different than what they normally do, but I think it's a feel-good issue. So if you're a dog lover, you'll definitely like it. Okay, I'm gonna move on to Cabernet. I think I'm doing pretty well, Carolyn, time-wise?
Oh yeah, you're doing good.
Okay. Oh, Cabernet. So this is where we kind of get back to what Dawn and I felt we could bring to the winery when we took over. We were special. We were world renowned for our Sauvignon Blanc program and Shenan, and also our Zinfandel program. But we really believed that our Bordeaux varietals, i.e. Cabernet, et cetera, had this opportunity from Dry Creek Valley. And a lot of it had to do with the soil makeup. I showed you earlier the photographs of that high iron content soil and the location of where these vineyards were planted. And so it's been kind of our life's mission to be the champion of Cabernet from Dry Creek Valley. So this is a 100% Dry Creek Valley appellated Cabernet. And my hunch is that there are very few in the New Hampshire stores that are 100% Dry Creek Valley. So I would urge you to look for that. Our grapes are grown primarily on the western side in some of those higher elevation vineyards. They're hand-picked, very difficult to farm, fairly steep terrain. And again, this shows you very clearly how bright red that soil is. And that iron content tends to translate into sort of a bright red cherry tone in the fruit when I smell this wine, almost like maybe grandma's cherry pie. But Dry Creek Valley, even though it might be better known for Zinfandel, there's actually the same amount, if not just a little bit more, Cabernet grown here. And a lot of that Cabernet gets blended into Sonoma County appellated wines and also even into Napa blends. But it was our desire to really showcase the region's potential for Cabernet. So we've been focused solely on 100% Dry Creek Valley ever since the early 2000s. I think another thing that makes our approach to Cabernet different is it is not a 100% Cabernet. We always, ever since the beginning of the winery, have advocated for Bordeaux blending. And so this is a blend of all 5 varietals. It's actually 79% Cabernet, 12% Merlot, and then 5% Malbec, and 2% Petit Verdot, and 2% Cab Franc. So those are the traditional red Bordeaux varietals that we use in our blend. And not a lot of wineries do that. So that kind of goes back to the historic sort of philosophic approach that my father took with the winery, based on a more traditional Bordelais or French style of winemaking. And one of the things that does for us, it gives this wine a great deal of complexity. So this is not a one-dimensional Cabernet. So the more that you swirl it and the more that you savor it and sip it, I believe the more you'll notice that it changes in the glass and it just opens up beautifully. You'll notice also when you taste it that it has that same nice bright acidity. Again, that nice level of acidity to keep it lively and not too heavy, helps it with its aging. It's a robust and complex and very rich wine, but it isn't, rip your mouth out with tannins or alcohol. And if I'm not mistaken, the alcohol I think is quite low. I think it's at 13.5%. Another sort of distinctive characteristic of Dry Creek Vineyard and Dry Creek Valley Cabernet is that we get these beautiful spice tones, almost more of a savory spice. So if I liken it to cooking, maybe a little bit of sage. Sometimes I almost smell a little bit of green tea or tea leaves, a little bit of mocha, a little bit of coffee beans. So, but subtle, very subtle. And I love a multi-dimensional Cabernet that changes and envelops, and that's what we're striving to do here. As far as aging, it's aged in about 18 months of a combination of French and American oak, and doesn't use the fusion barrel, more of a traditional barrel. And depending on the vintage, now this is why really the whole concept with blending, which also kind of is a good segue for the last wine. So depending on the vintage, certain vintages, Cabernet can be really tannic, right? And so that's why we add a little bit of Merlot to soften it. Or maybe the color is a little challenged, and so we'll add a little Petit Verdot, things like that. And that kind of is a good lead-in for the next wine, which is, let me just change wine glasses here, the Mariner. So the Mariner is a classic meritage, meaning it's a classic Bordeaux blend. And for those of you who don't know what the word meritage is, let me just quickly explain. It is simply a synonym for wines blended in the Bordeaux tradition. Why do we need it? Well, because some of the greatest wines in the world are less than 75% of one varietal. And yet our government requires that if it's less than 75%, that the wine be labeled as table wine. So that doesn't really take into account that some of the greatest wines are blends. And so back in the mid-1980s, a group of vintners, including my father, Dave Stare, got together and had a national contest. And their whole goal was to come up with a synonym or a classification, if you will, for wines blended in the Bordeaux tradition. And our winery was the first to adopt the term meritage and use it on a label back in 1985. So we are really credited with being a forerunner or a leader in the meritage movement. And we also call this wine the Mariner, again, a nod to our nautical roots. And it represents the best of the vintage. And that's what I love about this wine. I would say it's probably our most artistic wine. There's no particular percentage of any varietal that we're trying to strive for. It's a wine that is the best of the best. And so our first vintage was 2004. And this is actually, the one I'm drinking is the 2017, which is probably what you guys have in your glass. And if you think back of when we were transitioning the winery from the first to the second generation, we really had to develop these vineyards to support our desire to produce world-class red wines. And so this is a photograph of a 30-acre vineyard we developed actually in the Lytton Springs district of Dry Creek Valley. And it's planted to Cabernet. We actually grow some Petit Verdot there. But we call it the Endeavor Vineyard. And Endeavor, of course, is a famous sailing ship name, but more importantly, it represents what our dream was. Is, we were on an endeavor or a mission to make world-class Bordeaux style wines. And so this was the wine that Dawn and I dreamt of making. And now all these years later, it's so exciting to share it with you. So each vintage, the blend will change. This particular vintage is 69% Cabernet, 15% Merlot, 5% Petit Verdot, 5% Malbec, and a little bit of Cabernet Franc. And that should all add up to 100%. I'm not sure it does, but it should. And again, when the vintage is maybe a lighter vintage in terms of less color, we'll add a little more Petit Verdot, or maybe we add a little more Cabernet Franc to perk up the aroma. So this is where the artistry of winemaking comes into play. And I know that Tim loves producing this wine. It comes from our most prized hillside vineyards, basically the best of the best, and sometimes best sections within a vineyard. And then again, we get the opportunity to pick the best, not only the best lots, but the best barrels to come up with the final blend. This is aged for, about 20 months in small French oak barrels, or barriques as they're known. And, you know, it's interesting because increasingly, this is maybe sort of the underbelly of the wine world, but increasingly wineries are not using real oak barrels. They're starting to use oak alternatives, just like they're starting to blend in grapes from the very broad appellation of California. So when you're shopping, look at the appellation. This is why I'm so passionate about, you know, our region, Dry Creek Valley and Sonoma County, is we're really focusing. We want the wines to taste of a sense of place, and I believe strongly that, you know, as you're looking for wines, that just pay attention to the appellation, and so this is a wine. This is a wine that would go beautiful with maybe a great porterhouse, or maybe even some lamb chops, some grilled lamb. Some people do lamb for Easter. This might be a good one if you're doing that. Beautiful wine. This will definitely age beautifully if it's stored properly. I would say easily 10 to 15 years. And it really reflects, I think, what our mission is, which is to make world-class wines and never compromise. So I think without further ado, I will take a few more questions. I see a lot of questions in there.
Yes, we definitely have some great questions. I'm going to kind of group some of them together because a lot of people have been asking what you recommend pairing with Easter meals. So you have already touched upon that a little bit, about what proteins go great with your wines. I will mention Lisa just wrote a blog post about pairings for Easter as well. So check out our blog.
That's great. I have to read that, Lisa, because I haven't even figured out what I'm serving yet for Easter.
So if Kim didn't give you enough ideas for which Dry Creek wines to pair with your Easter meals, check out Lisa's blog as well for some additional ideas. Oh, so many great questions. Where to begin? Kim, have you ever been able to join us for Wine Week here in New Hampshire?
I have not, unfortunately.
Well, we're happy that you were able to virtually join us this year.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll be able to see you in real life soon. Erin left a comment here on Zoom about how we wish that Kim was with us in real life and we could be at a restaurant drinking wine and having dinner.
Me too. Those will be the days, right?
Absolutely.
I see one question that piques my attention, if that's okay. Somebody's talking about the corks behind me, and so the corks behind me are just for decoration. They're just to make this little corner of the cellar. Remember, folks, I'm in the corner of a dank, cold cellar surrounded by barrels. So this is our little set, and the corks are just for decoration. But it reminds me about something that I wanted to share with you, and that is we actually have a patent for our corks. We're the only winery that I know of with a patent for corks. And so our patent is based on the concept of printing the sustainable cork information directly on the cork. And this was an idea I had a number of years ago, and ties into our whole philosophy of sustainability. So we are 100% certified sustainable, all the estate vineyards and the business as a separate entity, and super passionate about that. And I wanted our corks to be a part of that. And of course, so when you open a bottle of Dry Creek and you pull out the cork, you learn the year of the cork was harvested. In this case, this photograph shows that it was harvested in July of 2017. You learn what the species is, which is Quercus suber, and you learn that cork is grown primarily in Spain and Portugal and is a natural habitat for the Spanish imperial eagle and the Iberian lynx, and provides a great, habitat for those animals. So this whole idea was something that I just kind of came up with and decided one day, I wonder if I could get a patent. And it happened. So we are the only winery with a patented cork. So that's kind of a fun bit of trivia.
That's awesome. Lisa, I have a question here for you. One of our viewers is wondering if all of the wines Kim tasted tonight are available at all of our stores, or are they only available at select locations?
So yeah, they are available in many of our stores, the Sauvignon Blanc, the Shenan Blanc, but there are a few that are not as widely available, like the Mariner, the 10 Block Chardonnay, and the Heritage Sin. But we have a lot of stores like Concord, Hooksett, Salem, Nashua, Hampton, Portsmouth. All of those major stores do have inventory. But if there's a favorite store that you have, we can make arrangements for you, and we will have whatever you want sent to your favorite store. So that's not a problem at all.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
No problem.
And then Kim, we've got lots of comments wishing the winery a happy almost 50th.
Thank you.
And congratulating you on your cover.
Thank you.
We have one question. I don't know if you'll have the answer. Somebody wants to know where they can get a copy of Wine Spectator here in New Hampshire. I don't know.
Oh gosh.
Pretty much any newsstand, any bookstore that has magazines. Wine Spectator's even in the grocery stores here.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Wine Spectator sold in the grocery stores here, so I would assume they would there too. It was the March 31st issue, and it might not be on the stands because you know how they always release those issues early. So hopefully it still is. I don't know how quickly your stands change over, but you'll have to look for it.
Absolutely.
And if somebody's dying to get their hands on one, trust me, I bought a lot. Happy to send you one.
So you'll have to buy one too, because when Kim comes to New Hampshire, we're going to have a line for everyone to sign the magazine.
Awesome.
So we have to have you come.
Oh, thank you. I would love that.
So Kim, Sarah, I think you guys had a little trivia question that we were going to close out with.
Yes, we do. And I thought about this, and I was thinking about making it really, really difficult. And then I decided, nope, I'm going to make it simple. So I have a feeling there'll be a lot of quick answers. And you're going to choose, right? Right, Carolyn?
Yep, I'm watching, and everybody who answers correctly, I'm going to put you into my randomizer, which everybody was very excited about my randomizer during our last event. So that way, everybody who answers correctly has a fair chance.
Okay, here it goes. Drum roll. Okay, what year were we founded?
Here come the answers. I don't know, guys. I don't know if these answers that I'm seeing so far are right. I don't think you guys were paying attention at all.
So this is how we find out if they are paying attention, right?
Yep. Oh, Patricia, I think you had a typo because I don't think Kim and her family were around in 972. All right, we've got a lot of correct answers. I'm adding everybody into the randomizer. We'll give everybody another minute or so.
Good job, everybody. That's the correct answer. Now the randomizer will pick the winner, right?
Correct.
And what's the prize? Do we get to say?
I don't know. Maybe
Is it a secret? Oh dear, did I just blow it?
No, you can tell them. You tell them while I'm pulling the winner.
Well, I believe it's a $100 gift certificate. Is that correct? To use in the stores? Hopefully on Dry Creek Vineyard wines, but not required.
I would like to add too that we also have a $2 coupon for tonight's wines as well. So with that $100 gift card, you can pick out some great Dry Creek wines.
Well, you'll be everybody will be they'll be perfect for Easter. They can have a nice assortment of wines for Easter for that.
All right, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me while I put all the correct answers in. We had quite a few responses on Facebook. Pretty much everybody participating on Zoom tonight had the correct answer. And tonight's winner is Olivia Becker. Congratulations, Olivia. I'm going to post my email address in the chat and you can email me and we can coordinate your prize.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. Congratulations, Olivia. Well, I guess I would just close by saying I love being here. I would love to meet all of you in person someday. And in the meantime, really appreciate your support of our family winery. It means the world to us. And I hope you can come and visit us someday. We actually are open by appointment outside, and we've got beautiful gardens and just a lovely setup. And I invite everybody to come visit. We've actually been picked many years in a row as one of the #1 wineries in our area by TripAdvisor. So not only do we excel in making and producing wonderful wines, but we really excel at warm, gracious hospitality. So I hope we get to see you someday. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Kim. We hope that we get to see you here in New Hampshire. I'm sure it looks like some of the ladies of Zoom are planning a road trip out to visit some of the wineries that we've had on for our live tastings. So you'll be seeing some of us.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to tell those ladies, you can go right on our website and book yourself a tasting appointment or call the winery, and we would love to see you. And of course, in addition to these wines, we have a whole assortment of wines that are only available here at the winery. So there's lots to learn and taste.
Awesome. Okay, I'm sorry, one more thing. So Olivia, who won our gift card, she just left a comment that she has actually visited you before, and her phone background is a picture from the winery. How awesome is that?
That's pretty cool. That's awesome. Oh, I'm glad she won then.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with some more live feeds throughout the month of April. The next one we have coming up it's a very special wine tasting, actually, because you can bring any wine you want. It's actually a glassware seminar where we're going to talk all about how using the right glass can make a difference to the taste of your wine. So bring your favorite wine and join us. I hope everybody has a great Easter. Check out Lisa's blog if you need more tips on which wines to serve, and we'll see you all again soon. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks, Kim.
Have a good evening. Bye, Kurt. Bye, Aaron. Bye, Carol Ann. Bye, Lisa.